India and the UK on Tuesday have announced a broad trade deal that removes tariffs on a majority of goods and services in a move that could serve as precursor to similar pacts that have been signed between New Delhi and other nations, including the US. Let's quickly now get in my colleague Disha Bakshi to break this down for us in greater detail in terms of the India-UK Free Trade Pact that has just been announced by Prime Minister Modi in terms of the negotiations that have been going on between India and the UK for some time now, and that has finally led to a big breakthrough in terms of the trade talks and trade negotiations that have finally fructified into a trade pact. Historic milestone, and Prime Minister has announced that on the platform X. Let's quickly now get in Disha Bakshi to fill us in with the very latest on this. Disha, this is a big breakthrough that has happened between India and UK. Fill us in.
Absolutely, this is a major breakthrough, and this comes after talks between India and UK had really fast-tracked since the past year, since US Starmer won the election last year and further was boosted, and it was, in fact, the talks were fast-tracked after US President Donald Trump came back to office and really started with his flip-flopping policies over tariffs, really pushed India and UK to now reach this historic deal. In fact, in the tweet that Prime Minister Modi, where he announced this historic deal, he mentioned that this is a historic milestone in the bilateral strategic partnership between the two countries, which will now foster trade, investment, innovation, and job creation in both these countries. So there were various sticking points when it comes to this historic landmark deal that has now been reached. And these sticking points included certain demands from India regarding visa relaxations for both students as well as workers who wanted from India who wanted to go to the UK. But now it seems that those sticking points those sticking points have in fact been removed, and now we have reached this historic landmark deal between India and UK. In fact, now it will reduce any trade barriers that existed between the two countries. And in fact, talking about the trade relationship between the two countries, UK is one of the top one of India's top trading partners, and now this deal will open up new avenues of cooperation between the two countries.
That is the big story that's coming in right now on India Global. Prime Minister Modi, in a tweet on platform X, announced that this is a historic milestone, and he said that he's looking forward to meeting Prime Minister Keir Starmer in India soon, following an April 28th visit to London by Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal. Both sides have anticipated concluding this trade talks for some time. And in fact, this comes even as, Disha, there's been a lot of back and forth, isn't it, on these trade talks. They have been on again, off again, on again, off again. So to that extent, it sends out a very strong message, doesn't it, that when it comes to trade talks, India is now moving ahead fast and it wants to conclude these deals. And some of the other negotiations may also gather pace now.
Absolutely. There was a lot of back and forth between India and UK over the past decade or so. But now with Keir Starmer coming to office and, of course, the US's continuous flip-flopping when it comes to their tariff policy really pushed both countries to get over these sticking points when it comes to tariff rules around whisky, around automobiles, around pharmaceuticals, of course, the visa demands that India was making. These are some of the various sticking points that were really, there were concerns from both sides regarding how to get over these sticking points. But now with this deal being closed, it is, now we have crossed over and gotten over these sticking points. And in fact, there were various visits by UK trade officials to India over the past couple of months. We saw Jonathan Reynolds in India a couple of months ago, and even Piyush Goyal, our trade minister, was in fact in London just last week. And now we have seen that this landmark deal has been signed. And these are big wins, not for whiskey, for cars, for UK exports such as Scotch whisky and luxury cars, which were, two of the major sectors that have been hit by Donald Trump's tariffs.
Yes.
He has, in fact, imposed 25% auto tariffs on the industry. So now with this deal, it really helps these UK exports, but also India and Indian students who have been facing certain raised restrictions from UK earlier.
All right, Disha, stay with me because I want to quickly now get in Scott Lucas as well to talk more about the impact this has in terms of the larger India-UK relationship, the impact this has on India's trade talks that are also progressing with some of the other countries, and the message it sends out to probably one of the most contentious set of trade negotiations that are taking place, that is with the US as well. But Prime Minister Modi announced it just a day after it seemed that these conversations may take longer. It seemed that there was some sort of a stalling in those negotiations, but I guess it was the intent from the highest office of the land that really pushed these negotiations forward, which is why closure has happened with Prime Minister Modi announcing the same. Bilateral investment agreement, the FTA and the Social Security Pact, called the Double Contribution Convention Agreement, are essentially the four key aspects that were being discussed between India and UK. Remember, there's also the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is to be introduced in about 2 years from now, along with data localization clauses. That was some of the contentious issues between the two sides, India and the UK. All right, let's go back to Disha and talk more about, Disha, there were some critical factors. There were some, I wouldn't say deal breakers because we have a deal in place, but there were some roadblocks, weren't there? And the interesting thing would be to watch out for and identify what really was the final give and take that led to these talks concluding.
So, of course, apart from the sticking points that I mentioned, another breaking point was, in fact, the carbon tax. India had certain concerns about UK and its carbon tax, and that was also one of the sticking points that have now been overcome and this deal has been reached. But apart from that, as I mentioned, there were concerns over, of course, India's demands over visa relaxation. And apart from that, of course, UK had certain demands regarding reducing tariffs and import taxes duties that India had. But it seems now these sticking points have been over.
In fact, Disha, stay with me because I want to quickly now rope in Scott Lucas as well, who's joining us live to talk more about the impact this has. He's a professor of US international politics, in fact, University of Birmingham in the UK. Professor Lucas, now this is a very important development that has happened, sets the pace in terms of what lies ahead between the India-UK trade relationship and the give and take that would have finally happened, leading to these breakthrough in talks. Your first reaction to this news that we are putting out and breaking right now on India Global?
My first reaction is that this is a win-win for both India and the UK for slightly different reasons. Although the fundamental is that you try to encourage free trade. For the UK, of course, this is after years of struggle, trying to get a significant free trade agreement to offset the economic damage of Brexit. The negotiations for this, ironically, began under the Conservative government that oversaw Brexit. They began under Boris Johnson. But of course, the whole idea of a US-UK trade deal never came about, probably won't come about. Donald Trump's tariffs have made that a more remote possibility. The UK needed something to show people economically that it is not isolated. For India, it's that idea of opening up, expanding into obviously a very large market, one of India's largest markets. It also opens up the idea of India-UK military cooperation, which is quite important. And it offsets China, which of course has the alternative economic model for development. But I think also something which is beyond where we were in these negotiations in 2021 is it is different because of the threat that the US is withdrawing from the global trading system. Both countries need alternative partners to cover for what might be a loss of US markets. And what made this deal possible? Let's just be very blunt here. It was held up for a long time because the same conservative government that was proposing free trade also was restricting immigration, especially immigration from countries like India. It will be interesting to see if the Labour government, despite right-wing pressure, has said, no, we are not restricting Indian students, Indian workers who come in and contribute to the British economy.
Indeed, that's a very important point you're making. And that's really one of the issues in these negotiations, isn't it? The flow and movement of people. Remember, India is a large services exporter, and concerns and restrictions around immigration have a direct impact when it comes to India's export of services. So that ends up becoming a bit of a roadblock. Interestingly, Scott, one of the things that the Prime Minister has put out, in fact, the statement that has come in says that it will help unlock new potential for the two countries to jointly develop products and services for global markets, indicating the kind of potential that this really throws up in a very protectionist trade environment with a lot of global trade uncertainties.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those examples. India has a very large pharmaceuticals market. The UK, my daughter happens to have worked in the industry, has a very vibrant pharmaceuticals industry as well. Can you make this a win-win relationship in terms of moving back and forth in terms of medical technology? Let's talk about high tech and the possibilities in AI. We have talked for a long time about the US with people like Elon Musk supposedly being the dominant AI power, or China. India and UK have a great deal of high tech and AI potential. Can they establish a cooperative relationship to develop? And then let's talk about sectors which have been in a bit of trouble. The UK steel industry is in a dire state right now. One of its last major steel producers, perhaps its last domestic steel producer, has lost its Chinese owner and has effectively had to be nationalized. Is there a possibility that India, which was a player in the UK steel market, can come back in? So yes, there are potential here for cooperation while keeping eyes open that the two countries also do compete in certain markets as well. And that will continue despite a free trade agreement.
Absolutely. I'm going to slip into a break, but I'm going to come back to this biggest story that is breaking in right now. The India-UK Trade Pact, its impact going forward on a larger basis for India, becoming the biggest destination for global companies to come in as they look to diversify away from China, burnishes India's credentials where it keeps on negotiating but is not able to close trade deals. What does it mean for the other set of negotiations that we are having with America? We come back and talk on all that and more. Stay with us. Viewers, if you're tuning in right now to India Global, the big story that we are focusing on right now, the India-UK Trade Pact that has been in talks for not months but years has finally happened. The breakthrough was achieved at the highest political office level between the Prime Ministers. Prime Minister Modi announced that on social media a short while back. The Free Trade Pact between India and UK is set to act as a major boost for trade and investment between the two countries and will also act as a major driver for investments for India at a time of great global trade uncertainties. It will also mean that India, in fact, two big ramifications of this for India. One, it is a negotiator looking to close deals, something that it hasn't been able to do so in the past, but now it will be viewed as a negotiator looking to close deals. And the second other important fact and the big takeaway before I get in Scott Lucas is that it sets a precedent as to how companies looking to diversify away from China, it will further boost India's credentials. And Scott Lucas, let me ask you on that in terms of the upside that we're looking at. One is the upside for the India-UK bilateral trade that will really boost. And second is the upside for India as a big destination for global investment, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we go beyond the UK at this moment, the effect of Donald Trump's tariffs, and I'm sure you all know this, is that Apple, for example, who produces the iPhone in China, is looking to move production to India because there's a much lower tariff on Indian goods going into the US rather than China. But if you think about it, and we take the US to the side, if you're a UK company and you're looking at where you could set up factories, if you're looking at where you could set up your high tech investment, do you go into the US market, which is a very uncertain market now in terms of the amount of burden that you might have to pay, given what the Trump administration is doing? Or do you go into an India, which is moving from, and let's be honest here, is moving from what has been a relatively high tariff country to one which is looking to reduce those tariffs? Again, I have to emphasize that while the UK and India, are not completely dependent on Washington, each of these countries had investment interests, but they could not get the breakthrough until February. They resumed the talks. Why did they resume the talks in February? In part because the Labour government has finally settled in the UK, but in part because they see what's happening with the US. And this is the effect of Donald Trump holding up that magic chart saying, look, if you want to sell your products in the United States, you're going to have to pay a 26% tariff or a 30 or a 40% tariff, is that both Indian companies and UK companies thought we need to start looking at each other. And importantly, not just in terms of goods, where a lot of the discussion is around, but also in terms of services. And there is a room for a great deal of expansion for both countries in the services sectors, which tended to be led in recent years by the United States.
All right. In fact, Scott, as we go through and await the fine print from the two sides in terms of what the trade pact really is all about, well, what I can say is that in terms of, if we're to talk in pounds, the UK-India total trade last year was about 41 billion pounds and is expected to, of course, grow at a fast pace. And in fact, the boost by the trade pact could be an additional 25 billion pounds a year by 2040. So a 15-year upside is that it could be 25 billion pounds every year if the trade pact does come through. So that's the kind of upside that is available immediately for the two sides. We are talking about external factors. We're talking about the fact that there is a push that's come in because of Donald Trump and his trade tariffs. But one also needs to now focus in terms of what it means for the exporters of the two countries, because when you talk about trade pacts, it boils down to first that areas where you want tariffs to come down, areas and industries where you want to protect your domestic manufacturers. That's really the balance between getting that trade pact going. Professor Lucas, for the UK, whisky will be a big upside along with a couple of other sectors.
Absolutely. I mean, the UK effectively shut itself off from the European market. It, in effect, imposed a tariff on its own goods going into the EU when it withdrew from what was a zero tariff area, a common market. So again, the UK, in effect, had isolated itself. Now, they're not going to go back into the EU. They're not even going to go back into a single European market. You have to look elsewhere.
In fact, Scott, stay with us, because I want to quickly now get in another important guest joining me as well to talk more about this. His first thoughts in Jasper Reid, who's a British entrepreneur, joining us to talk more about what this means for entrepreneurs, for businesses like you, Jasper. What is the kind of potential that you expect for businesses from this trade pact?
Hi, listen, I think it's great news. I mean, hats off to both of the team. This has been a decade in the making. These are not easy things to do. So everybody should pause to congratulate themselves. Look, I think here, it's a big trading relationship anyway. This is a great signal. It will affect certain sectors. But I think more importantly, in an uncertain world, it's a very, very clear statement strategically of the UK and India becoming ever closer aligned.
And in terms of specific sectors where you feel the upside would be more, the potential would be most, Jasper?
Well, I think that's well trailed. I mean, I think there are, if you're looking at the movement of people to the UK, I think that will benefit people clearly, and this has been well advertised. UK whiskey exporters will do well. Basically, it pushes down tariffs across a wide range of areas, and I think that's very good news in the sense that historically India has had high tariff rates, and that's been a barrier to importers into India.
Very quickly, I want to ask this to both of you, which is that specifically, the one thing in the statement that stands out is that both countries now will be able to explore areas where they can produce together for global markets. Which are these sectors are we talking about? Are we talking about semiconductors or something more old school? Jasper, to you first.
Well, I was writing about this today. In essence, if you take this back to the core competencies in the country, both countries have spectacular research, education, high-end science and tech capability. And I am very, very optimistic that both markets can find ways to work together. Because in the end, there's a whole bunch of needs in Western markets like the UK, and there's a whole bunch of skills and capability in India. So for me, the much, much bigger game is strategic deals where intellectual property, movement of talent, hardcore research in AI, in neuroscience, in quantum, these are fantastic areas. They're much, much bigger than Scotch.
Of course, that is the first low-hanging fruit, not so low-hanging for the UK trade negotiators, but definitely there's a huge development that has happened in the India-UK trade talks have finalized. They've led to a trade pact, the first in a series, hopefully, given that there are many other negotiations that are on for India. On that note, completely timed out in this edition of India Global. Thanks so very much for watching.